I'm delighted to be here at the York Festival of Ideas. When I said yes, I didn't know it was going to be an election. So I've been emailing a lot of people at the BBC going, it's a long-standing thing. I've said yes ages ago. Not that I'm that important in the election anyway. My name is Katie Razzall. I'm the culture and media editor at the BBC, at BBC News. And I am so delighted to be here with these two incredibly distinguished figures from the Indian creative industries. I'm sure all of you know, because you've read all about them and know all about them already, but Shekhar is a filmmaker, an actor, a TV presenter, an entrepreneur, probably best known here for award-winning films, including Elizabeth and Elizabeth the Golden Age. But he's also an executive producer on the Bollywood-themed Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Bombay Dreams, and films such as The Guru for Universal Studios. And also, and maybe we'll come to this as well, set up Virgin Comics. So, yeah, anyway, we'll come to that, and is very garlanded and much awarded. Vikas is a former diplomat, retired 3 years ago. Gives him even more time for writing, perhaps. He's a television host, he's a best-selling author who I'm sure many of you will know gained global recognition because his debut novel was called Q&A, and that was adapted into the Oscar-winning film Slumdog Millionaire. And he has he has several novels that he's already written and one about to come out, so I'm sure we will hear much more about that shortly. We've got an hour, or about an hour. I hope we're going to have half an hour's worth of questions, because I'm sure you have much more interesting questions than me. But I was going to kick off. This is a event, a whole festival about creativity. He's going to put that on social media before he leaves here, quite rightly. This is a whole event about creativity, and this is called, I think, the power. The force of creativity, the power of creativity. And I suppose I wanted to ask you, start with you, Shekhar. Was there a moment, can you remember a moment when you realised that is it difficult to say you had creativity or interested in creativity, or that you wanted to work in the creative world? Was it something you were aware of from a young age, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was not necessarily, I didn't know what it was, but I think that twice in my life it happened. Once when I was about 12 years old, I used to live in Delhi, and Delhi was not a polluted city at all at that time, and I could see the Milky Way. Because we all used to, in summer, we would sleep on the terrace, and I could see the Milky Way, and I remember asking my mother, I kept staring up and saying, so how far does this go? And she said, it goes on forever. And I was struggling with that word. I guess that was it, because somewhere in, about 11, 12, you started to learn physics, and you started to understand the idea of measurement, and everything has to be measured. If it doesn't measure, if you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist, and I'm measurable. But this goes on forever, what does that mean? So I think that, I would actually lie down all night staring out, trying to imagine forever, and start crying as a kid. And that was the first thing, and I'm still trying to find forever. But I guess that's what creativity is. I think all art is the attempt to find or reach out to the infinite within your own finite self. That was first. And second, who wouldn't do what I did? I trained to be a chartered accountant. So that was the second provocation.
Parental pressure?
Yeah, middle class boy, that's what you do. So that was the second thing. Having finished accountancy, I went, now I can really try and find out who I am. So these two things just pushed me. Filmmaking is something I fell into.
And we'll come into that. I wonder, when you were 12 and you were looking at the Milky Way, did you feel different from your friends? Were you trying to have conversation with your friends who weren't looking at the Milky Way and feeling the same way, who perhaps did end up staying as chartered accountants?
I felt different. But then I feel different. If I said, you say, Sheikh, how are you? Oh, I'm searching forever. But it's true, it's what drives you till you find and look for forever. It just keeps driving you. Yeah, I guess I was a bit different.
And what about you, Vikas? Did you feel different? I know you went into a very successful career as a diplomat, which is, every career has creativity in it. I'm not, by the way, being rude about chartered accountants. That, you know, I'm sure is just as creative. I just don't know much about it. It's not my world. But for you, which came first? I know in time terms, which came first? You were a diplomat before you were an author. But did you always have that kind of desire to write books?
No, actually, I was always a reader. In fact, I've never been to a creative writing workshop. I didn't even have English literature as my subject. I was always a reader. And one of the advantages of growing up in pre-internet India, pre-cable TV, pre-Netflix, pre-PlayStation 4 was that, the only thing you could do was read. There was no other pastimes, no other distractions, so to speak. And I grew up as a reader. It was only, and I of course joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1986. And it was only when I was posted in London between 2000 and 2003 that the first stirrings of, can you be an author started happening within me. And there were two inspirations. One, of course, was being in the city of London itself, such a hub for the world of English language publishing, seeing new authors being born, because adjacent to the Indian High Commission is the Nehru Center, which is our cultural center. And that Nehru Center could be rented out to any publishing house who was, wanting to launch their next book or their next author. So seeing that, I think, acted as an inspiration. And the second inspiration was that many of my contemporaries in the Indian Foreign Service were trying their hand at fiction. Humphrey Hoxley, who's your colleague, used to be your colleague in the BBC, told me, Vikas, I have yet to meet an Indian Foreign Service officer who's not in search of a publisher. So, when I discovered that, Navteej Sarna has written a book, and T.S. Tirumurti, another colleague of mine, had written a book, that's when I asked this question to myself. I said, do I also have a book inside me? Can I be an author? And I wrote this book, Q&A, in complete secrecy in 2.5 months in London. And of course, when I wrote it, I had no expectation of success at all. But probably the book had its own destiny, and that's how I was known. I mean, you're inviting me here as a creative person because of that.
Yes, that's true. And I wondered, before we talk about that book and how the idea for it and everything, as a diplomat and as an author, we're always looking for parallel, sort of crossovers in different mediums and disciplines, and whether one feeds on the other. And could you reflect a bit on...
Technically,
diplomacy is fiction.
Exactly. Well, this is what I want to know, basically.
Shekhar is feeding into that old trope, a diplomat is someone who's paid to lie for his country. No, but I think a better definition of a diplomat is someone who can tell you to go to hell in such a way that you actually look forward to the trip. But you see, so a diplomat is someone, who's very suave, and who's very polished, and of course...
hence the beautiful...
yes, exactly, and who speaks in very polite language, and even if he conveys a very tough message, he conveys it in a way that, you don't feel offended. But a writer, I think, is someone who has to tell it as he sees it, without pulling any punches. So from that point of view, I think there is a contradiction between the role of a diplomat and the role of a writer. The one thing common, I think, that to the two professions, I would say, is that a diplomat also is trained to use words very carefully. Our entire profession is based on nuance, using the right word for the right occasion, because one wrong word and bilateral relations can go into a tailspin. And I think that training of knowing the weight of words, using words carefully, comes in handy when you're writing something other than official reports.
Well, let's talk about both of you and how you got into your careers, your creative careers. For you, I know I was joking about, your parents pushing you, but I believe your father didn't want you to be an actor. Is that right?
For him, he wanted me to be... My mother didn't want me to be. She didn't want me to be a doctor, because my father was a doctor. But, it's like I had to be professional. It was not something... So when I remember coming home one day and went into Delhi, and my father was shaving. And he looked at the mirror and said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in London." I said, "No, I'm here, and I've left accountancy, and I'm going to the creative business, and you cannot stop me." And he just cut himself a little bit. And he said, "Okay, son, we should talk about this." But that's it. No, that's not what they wanted me to do. I didn't know I wanted to do that, because I still don't know what I want to do. And that's what's so exciting about saying that I'm a creative person is a great act of freedom. It's a great act of rebellion. And you go on saying I'm creative, so you can go on rebelling. And as long as you can go on rebelling, you can go on being alive.
And what do you think being a creative person means to you? How do you do that?
It means that nothing is certain, nothing is definite, that you worship this idea of everything being indefinite, and you're constantly searching for answers and constantly rejecting them because you know you're not looking for answers. I mean...
How do you ever direct a film if you're never certain?
I'm not. I tell you exactly what I do. It's a secret, please. There are no producers here, right? No, but it really is. When I'm going to make a film, when I go on the set, because I'm an accountant maybe, or trained to be, I plan like a general. And I go, everything's planned because you never know, and you know where the bullet might come from. Somebody's wig doesn't turn up and they say, well, that's your fault, Shekhar. You have to solve it. Like, but the one thing I cannot plan for is the moment. So when I get there, I'm trying desperately to panic myself. Because if I don't panic myself, then I'll only do what I planned. Then where's the creativity? The creative act has to be something that emerges from somewhere, not from planning. But planning is just the preparation of the mind to receive the creative act, that uncertain thing, to receive it and recognize, oh my God, God's spoken to me, now I better go. I mean, I'm just saying, you know, it's... So I go there and I will keep telling them, every day I'd go there and I'd say, today is the day they're going to realize that I've been conning everybody for a few years now. So you have to say something to get your ego out of the way, to get your mind out of the way. If not, for those that know his music, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, I would listen to him because there's a Qawwali, so creative. And then I would go and then I would panic. Because if I don't panic, my mind dominates me. Preparation dominates me. Panic creates that space for something else to come in. And there are a few actors I work with, so Kate Blanchett will say, oh God, Shekhar, you're doing it again. You don't know what you're doing. I said, no, I don't, Kate, but what would you like to do? And that's how I bite time. So,
we've just got an amazing insight into his creative world. That's brilliant. You were nodding. Do you thrive on planning and panic? Is that or how do you see it?
No, I mean, as a diplomat, you plan for the unforeseen. In fact, you plan that, you know, everything goes as per plan. And that's why, you know, when a diplomatic meeting takes place, the outcome is already predetermined. The only time it did not happen was when Justin Trudeau visited India. But apart from that...
What happened then?
Well, the whole visit sort of fell apart and, you know, it didn't really go as planned. But otherwise, 99.9%, the outcomes, the agreements, everything is already pre-decided.
But what about as an author? In
so
your
as an
creative
author, I think
world?
that's the difference. The author, I think, is about chaos. And you have to find meaning from that chaos. And I think as an author, you know, when I was not an author, I was looking at the world in very surface terms. But when you start thinking like an author, then you start looking at patterns, you start looking at meanings below the surface, you know, trying to find patterns. That, you know, if there are two people talking, then if you are not an author, you would just see there are two people talking. But when you are trying to look at the world through an author's eyes, then you start thinking, why are they talking? Who are these two people? What brought them together? You know, and you start thinking backwards and forwards and sort of creating something in your own head, you know, taking that moment as the reference point. So I think that is, to me, that's what creativity. Because, you know, at the end of the day, writing a novel is about giving order to imagination. It's ordered imagination. And for that order, it's important that, you know, you frame the narrative in your head. You know, these isolated events that you are seeing, you have to put them all together and create order out of chaos.
Interesting. I love this. Chaos and, you know, planning, but also panic. These, I'm taking these away. I'm going to take them back to the BBC and see how my bosses feel when but I'm being creative. I went off on a really fascinating, or you all went off on a brilliant tangent that I took you on, but I do want to know how you went from that decision, I'm not going to be a chartered accountant, I'm going into the creative world, to becoming the success that you were. How did you get in there? You said you fell into it.
I fell into everything. We do. I mean, listen, if you're as old as I am now, you look back and you say, where are the decisions I made that actually happened? And you realize, no, you didn't. You didn't make any decisions. Everything was chance. And control is the biggest illusion ever. All of us, when I look back and realize can I tell you a story?
Yeah, please. That's what you're here
So
for.
So it's like, okay, imagine you're falling down and you have a parachute and you're in control of the parachute, right? You can go right, you can turn left, the storm comes, you can control it. And it's okay, you're floating through life. And then somebody comes and says, hey, why don't you look up? And you say, I don't need to look up, I'm fine. Say, oh, no, look up. And you look up and you realize there was no parachute. There never was. And then you say, oh my God, I'm falling. And they say, well, look down. You look down, there's nothing to fall into. There was no parachute. And then you say, well, then you realize you didn't fall off anything. Then you did. So that's chaos. That's chaos where you realize, and then that's how we all started telling stories. Because then you created mythology. Oh, there were some good gods and bad gods. Somebody threw me off in some place called heaven, and there is this other place, and then there's somebody to catch me, and other people don't. But otherwise, you start with this idea that you didn't fall off. Who are you? What is your existence? That's why I left chartered accounting. That's why I left, and that's really why I went away. And I went away, and I said, I'll see what happens. And I needed some money, and I started to model. And then I met a girl, and her parents, and she said, you're great at telling stories, Shekhar, you should be making films. So I said, okay. Then I started to make films, and I was very lucky. My first film was a huge success.
What was that?
It was called Masoom. I don't know if anybody from India must have seen it. Yeah, they've seen it. And it's still 40 years later, it shows on television 3 times a month. I don't know, how did it get made? Why would anybody allow me to make a film when I've never learned how to make a film?
And what's the answer? Why did they?
It was destined. No, I don't know what destiny is, but it was supposed to be. But there were a million things that come together. You know, I keep asking myself, right? Can I go a little deeper? Is it okay? Yes. Yeah? So I pick up this glass, right? And I go I pick this up and I put it here. That involves time. I have to accept the existence of time to do that. And yet we know in art, all artists are trying to destroy the idea of time. You create something completely still and say there's no time, but you imagine it. But yet, if there's no time, then according to quantum physics, the glass is here at the same time. And if it's here and there at the same time, and if I didn't make the decision, then my ego says to me, then who are you? So the idea that I came is that the ego defines an imaginary idea called time. So it's when you constantly are thinking like that, somebody says make a film, you say, okay. You ask me, I'll do it. Really, that's how it happened. So anybody
yeah, but you could have made a bad film, and instead you made a film that was a hit.
It happened to be a hit. I would say I did not make a film that was a hit.
No,
I made a film that just happened to be a hit.
And have you made films that haven't?
Oh yes, of course I have. We won't talk about them.
We won't talk about it. Apart from what did you learn from that?
The films I have worked hardest on didn't succeed. So that doesn't mean don't work hard. It means don't overthink it. Probably, yeah.
And Vikas, what about you? When you sat down to write Q&A, you can't possibly have imagined that time would take you to a place where years later...
No, absolutely. Because
you was winning Oscars.
Because you see, till that point in time, books about India, which had done well, were books about, let's say, the Raj, or about the upper tier of India, palaces and maharajas and yoga and elephants and all that stuff. My book was about the underbelly of urban India. And I thought this is a book written by an insider, for insiders, that I thought only Indians would be able to relate to this book. I had no idea books were even translated. Actually, for me, it's very gratifying that, a book which I wrote in 2.5 months while being posted in London, found a global resonance and people were able to relate to it. And that's what made me realize that because the theme of that book was, it was about the underdog winning. And I think that is a theme that resonates with every community, every culture. And I think it was that universal element within that novel that appealed to a global audience.
And where did you get the idea from? Do you remember was it a
Yes,
eureka moment?
yes,
Was it slow?
yes. No, I can tell you exact moment when I got that idea. I was sitting in London watching a television show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And the famous episode happened of Major Charles Ingram. You all know about Major Charles Ingram. He won £1 million on the British edition of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But then they suspected that something was not quite right. They reviewed the tapes. They discovered that on some of the questions on which he was fumbling, somebody in the audience was giving him answers through coded coughs. If the answer was B, there would be 2 coughs. If the answer was C, there would be 3 coughs. And of course, they discovered that these 2 other accomplices, one was his wife and one was a Cambridge professor. So of course, the £1 million was taken away from him. I think he received 2 years of probation or something like that, suspended sentence. And last I heard, he had quit the army and become a novelist. So that is what set me thinking. I said, if someone as respectable as a major in the British Army can be suspected of cheating, then why not have a contestant who would definitely be accused of cheating? And that's when I conceived of my protagonist, Ram Mohammed Thomas, who is an 18-year-old waiter working in Jimmy's Bar and Restaurant in Colaba in Mumbai, and who appears on the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, except I could not use Who Wants to Be a Millionaire because in my show, they are all a bunch of cheats. And if I had said, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is cheating people, then they would have sued me. So in my fictional universe, I created W3B, Who Wants to Be a Billionaire? They are offering ₹1 billion as prize money. So, and of course, their whole tactic is that, if you apply Katie to appear on that show, they'll say, sorry, our computer is not accepting you. So when this 18-year-old waiter applies, they say, how far can he go? Maybe second or third question, he'll be out. And they allow him to come on the show. He arrives, he is asked 12 questions, and he answers all 12 questions correctly. And they are stunned because they don't even have ₹1 billion to give. So that, for me, that was the takeoff point. I think I wanted to tap into this global success of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, because in India, and Shekhar would know this, the show became so popular. Amitabh Bachchan was the presenter. And the show became so popular that at 9 o'clock, when the show came on, you could not go to somebody's house. Weddings used to be interrupted so that the guests could first watch the show and then get on with the bride and the groom.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is what it was.
I used to go cycling.
At that time?
Because the roads were empty.
Yeah.
And you wrote it incredibly fast.
Yes, I
Did
wrote
it just pour out of you? Did you find the writing process easy?
Yeah, so the whole idea, I think, came to me as a package, and it was just a question of transcribing it onto my computer. And because I was in a full-time job, I was the political counselor at the Indian High Commission in London. I was reporting on the Second Gulf War that was happening at that time. So what I would do is I would go to the office 9:30 to 5:30, come home, do my research on the weekdays, and I would write only on weekends. One weekend I did 20,000 words, because what has been published is my first draft.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Danny Boyle came to me, I tell you that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
What was
Danny
that?
Boyle called me one day and he said, Shekhar, I have this film that I've said yes to, and I don't know what to do with it. And it was Slumdog Millionaire.
Yes.
Because he says, what do I do? Like, I don't understand this culture and everything. I said, Danny, you know what, just make it your own. He said, and what if they get upset with me? I said, they'll get more upset if it doesn't do well. Just make it your own.
Because Danny had not visited India till then.
Yeah, he hadn't been to India, yeah.
Do you think that would happen now? Do you think somebody, like Danny Boyle is a fabulous director, but do you think now it would be less likely that he would be the person picked to direct that film?
I don't know what the...
Oh, I
Shekhar would
think
know better
so. I
about
think
how
this is-
directors are picked. I have no
Hollywood
idea.
is very woke now.
Very woke, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, yeah, what? Oh, it's a woman's story, it has to be a woman director. 90% of the films I've ever done are about women. I won't get a job now if I do another film about a woman. The first thing they say, it's got a woman's director, so it's very woke. I doubt they would not take Danny. They'll have to take an Indian director, otherwise you have a billion people up in arms. So.
But also, Katie, I would say this film worked because it was the right film for the right time. This film came at the end of 2008, global economic crisis, people were losing jobs, people were losing hope. They wanted something that could inspire them. And comes along this film, which was marketed in UK, as you know, as the feel-good film of the decade. And I think because it was, and plus, you know, if you remember, India was growing at about 8 to 10% at that time. And there was a global curiosity and hunger about information about India. What makes India tick? And I think this film fed into, first, that sense of global curiosity. And secondly, you know, it provided people an outlet where, you know, they could dream. It could inspire them that, yes, you know, we will get through this tough period.
And you both, I mean, both of that film and then your films, particularly Elizabeth, you were sucked into the Hollywood machine, if you like. I don't know whether you were more on the outside of it because you actually weren't part of making the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the filmmakers have nothing to do with the author. Shekhar would confirm this. The author is kept at very... In fact, I didn't even know that they had started shooting this film. I only found out when I read a news report in an Indian newspaper that the filmmakers were arrested in Agra for shooting at the Taj Mahal without permission.
But they did get you involved, didn't they, once they realised they needed you?
Yeah, so basically what happened was, once this film came out, in India, it generated a lot of controversy. People said it is poverty porn. People said, you know, it presents India in a very negative light. Even the Taj Mahal is thrown through a layer of filth. And the filmmakers started panicking. The best thing was, the Slum Dwellers Association of India, which I didn't know existed, they filed a case against Danny Boyle and Simon Beaufoy and against me, you know, saying that we live in a slum and you have called us all dogs. And I said, first of all, my book was called Q&A, so please get me out of this. I am not part of this. And the case actually went to trial, I think, in Chennai. And the judge, of course, threw it away. He says there is no word in the English language called slumdog. This was just an invented word. That does not mean that, you know, you guys have been made dogs. So he threw it out. So they lost the case. But then they did the second best thing that they could do. They went and they bought 2 dogs. And they named one dog Danny and one dog Simon.
That's the way to turn around. When it comes to your experience of Hollywood, you obviously, it's, you know, Bollywood and Hollywood. You've experienced both. What are your impressions of overlap, distinctions? What was it like being sucked into the Hollywood machine?
It's the same, you know, for a director. By the time you say action and then you say cut, it's the same thing. It's what happens before action and after cut. It's a bit glib what I'm going to say, but it's true. Working in India and Bollywood is like going to the Chor Bazaar, you know. You don't really know what you're getting. You go to Hollywood, it's like going to a supermarket, you know exactly what you're getting. It's all organized. But ask me, what I prefer is the chaos. The chaos of not knowing what you're getting, as you said, chaos, it's a great driver of creativity.
So you would prefer always to be Bollywood?
Yeah. You know, when I was offered Elizabeth, I was down and out. I always do that. After a film, I tried not to make another film till I broke. And then I said, oh my God, give me a film, somebody, constantly. And I was in LA, I'd gone off to LA, I was living in people's carpets and sofas and didn't have the money to take a cab. I was hoping somebody would drive me. And Tim Bevan, who's a big producer here, out of the blue, he had seen Bandit Queen. And they had decided that they would offer me Elizabeth. And I said, okay. And then I panicked. At night, I just said, what have I just said yes to? I don't know who she is. I don't know history. I hate costume drama. So I actually called him the next day and said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it.
Even though I'm totally broke, I'm still not going to do it.
No, I'm not going to do it. I said, I don't know what to do. What would I do? And he said, well, I said, look, I make films like Bandit Queen. Like, 2 films. Where did you get the idea that I could make a frock film? And he said, yeah, no, I agree. That's why I want you to do it. You'll do something rebellious. And I said, oh, really? Then I pushed it further. I said, Tim, I don't like British films. So maybe that will work. He would fire me. He said, you're right, we haven't made a good film for a long time. And then I said, you know what? The only British film I've liked, which I had just seen, was Trainspotting. And he said, oh, I loved it. So I said, he said, yeah, I loved it. I said, I can make the Trainspotting version of Elizabeth. He said, yeah. Then I said, yes.
And do you think you did that?
I think so.
Because?
I think because actually, if you look at Elizabeth, okay, it's just, where do you mean it's history? Like it's not. Suddenly at the end of the film, Kate Blanchett playing Elizabeth gets a haircut, and then she goes bald, and she looks at the mirror and says, "Look, Cat, I am become a virgin." Huh? And then she emerges in white makeup and walks through, and everybody actually in the theater was crying and clapping. Like, what's going on? She says, no, "Look, I'm married." But I think people caught on to it. Where we saw that portrait was at the National Gallery, and I decided that what I was going to do, me and the writer, that what we're going to do is make a film about why does a woman need to declare herself a virgin to have power amongst men. Men don't say we're virgins. Men don't have to become masculine. Why does a woman? And it's true, and of course I'd seen that in in Indira Gandhi, our Prime Minister. Exactly the same story. Put her on the throne, or we'll get rid of her. Then she, she fights back. But then look at her costume, loses all femininity, severe. Her costumes, just like Elizabeth, went down up to here. So then I started to make that film. Yeah, just found the reason to make it, and then I went for it. Yeah,
and it was fantastic.
So Hollywood is
fantastic.
fun.
And I mean, we are in York, so I should do a little aside, which is you are not new to York because you did film a bit of that film in York Minster.
Yeah, I shot the coronation in York Minster. Yeah.
Now you can all go back and look at Elizabeth and recognise York Minster, but also you have a link to York as well, I think.
Which I have just discovered today when I arrived in York for the first time in my life. That in my book Q&A, which some of you would have read or maybe reading subsequently, there is a chapter where Ram Homer Thomas, my protagonist, has been virtually adopted by a priest called Father Timothy Francis, who's from York.
There you go. All routes lead to York, for sure. Absolutely for sure. I know, we've talked about sort of, not rules, because I would hate to say they were rules, but the sort of tenets around creativity. I don't know if anyone's seen, there is an amazing Brian Eno documentary that I saw recently, where one of the things he says in it is, he calls it no buts. He said every good idea can be ruined be squashed and killed by too many buts at the beginning. Do you have any of those kind of rules around?
The buts come from yourself also, Exactly. It's self-doubt. So intuition is a very beautiful thing, but intuition then suddenly considered intuition is not intuition. So you just have to just go. Of course, in the Hollywood system, which is gone in, you just got to stop listening to people.
But you have to have confidence to be able to do that, don't you?
No, you've got to be rebellious. If rebelliousness is confidence, then call it. But there is no act of creativity without rebelliousness. You have to rebel. So I always wanted to be a great cricketer. I was not good enough. So when I'm sitting with the big Hollywood studios and all the honchos and they're telling me what to do, my mind switches to me playing cricket. And I'm hitting balls 6 here and 6 there and 6 there. I found that way to do it. And I said, or you confound them with something. So, I remember one day they said, Shekhar, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I said, I'm going to do it. And they said, oh God, Shekhar, if you go on like this, you'll never work in this town again. That's studio heads have said that to me. And I just looked at them quietly and I said, guys, the day you can control your destiny, try and control mine. Who'll work in this? That was actually Harvey Weinstein who said
I was going to ask you whether it was Harvey Weinstein, so that's interesting.
So no, you just got to be rebellious and keep kicking, because there's something that, it's like childhood. Intuition is like being a child. It's so easy to snatch childhood away. And so you have to keep protecting this idea of intuition. And so, but then it's not only the exterior world that takes it away, it's yourself. Because you suddenly say, oh, I'm a grown-up, I have to be responsible. That idea of I have to be responsible takes away intuition also, because responsibility also, you don't understand what it means, so it just creates doubt. So you just got to keep in a state of wonder. That's it, constantly.
And when it comes to the challenges you've both faced in your creative worlds, what would you say have been the most challenging elements? And is it, are those challenges different in the Indian context than they are in the, Hollywood or British or global, whatever it might be, context? Or are challenges always the same?
You see, when I wrote Q&A, I wrote it in an era which was still the gatekeeper economy. In the sense, if you wanted to be a writer, you wanted to be a published author, especially in the West, you had to go through an agent, and that agent had to go through a publisher. That is how, it's still that thing, but those gatekeepers have been dismissed now. You can go straight to Amazon, you can go straight to self-publishing, things which were not that easy in 2003.
I'm going to contradict him.
When I wrote that. So I think the gatekeepers have largely gone. You saw how Justin Bieber was discovered. His mother started putting his videos on YouTube, and somebody just discovered him, Whereas in the past, without a studio label, there was no way Justin Bieber could have been discovered. So I was a product of that particular era. The challenges, I think, are the same even now. Shekhar talked about intuition. Every work of creativity starts with that you having a certain idea which you think will work, which is an intuition. And then the but comes in, the doubt, the self-doubt, that will this work? Will this be the worst book ever written? Till I reach what I call the point of no return, that no, I am finishing this. I don't care if one person reads it, but I'm finishing this. So for me, that is the challenge, that you have to push yourself and, get over the hump of that self-doubt.
Well, for me, that decision is easy. I run out of money. So there's no way you could push it. Somebody says, that's it, Shekhar, now you have to stop. Then you stop.
But I wanted to ask you, actually, when you mentioned that before, is it a deliberate policy, presumably it is, to do nothing until you run out of money before you make another film? And if so, why? Is it that the experience of filmmaking is so traumatic and chaotic that you can't do it again until you're really forced to? Or what's the rationale behind it?
The rationale is that you want to be moved by something. You desperately want to be moved, and therefore you keep waiting to be moved by something. Every film that I've made has come out with something that I've been completely moved by. If you've seen Bandit Queen, it was about the fact that rape is not a sexual act. I had to be moved by and understand that, So you keep waiting to be moved, and then one day you run out of the money and you say, I better be moved. And then you find things and say, okay, maybe I like this, maybe I like that, and then you do that. Then you become much more active at looking for something because you can't pay your bills.
And just to go back to the challenges question, are the challenges the same wherever you're working?
It's exactly the same. It's the context, because if you look at what people say, there are a lot of people who've seen my Indian films here. Mr. India is hugely, everyone in India has seen Mr. India, but I have this constant battle with the West who keeps saying, oh, Shekhar, please don't be as melodramatic as a Bollywood film. And I say, they're not melodramatic, they're mythic. Our culture is mythic. If you go to a funeral in India and people are not crying, they're professional criers who come, who will weep and whip themselves and make you cry. You go to a funeral here and you look at somebody crying and say, not supposed to. We are mythic. We feel like, I feel that, falling in love is a huge mythic act. Being betrayed is even bigger mythic act. Death is mythic, birth is mythic. And we have a completely different way of looking at life. Everybody does. One day my cook in London, when I was making films, so I said, come, Suresh's name. Look, here's the anniversary on television of man landing on the moon. And he said, looked at it, he said, sir, I worship the moon. This is visual effects. You're a filmmaker. I don't believe it. So I said, no, I'm going to take him to the Science Museum. And I go show him in the Science Museum, you have this capsule, there's this old replica and everything, and a lot of gold. I think he got impressed with that because it was all gold foil around. But he came back and I said triumphantly, "So, Suresh, look, man landed on the moon, you agree?" He said, "Yes, sir." And then he had this smile on his face that I said, "Oh shit, something's coming up." And he said, "Sir, he landed on your moon, not my moon." So there is a mythology to the moon that he's not going to shift. There must be two moons, my moon and his moon, differently. So in the West, what we call mythic, or even Korean dramas, you all have seen Korean dramas, Squid Games, most of you have seen it. It's so melodramatic, but it's mythic because we look at life where destiny becomes such a large part of our understanding of life, or the way it is. In the West, it's not. It's melodramatic.
And in the West, when you first certainly started interacting with the movie industry or TV industry or whatever it might be, did you feel that disconnect intensely, and did you feel that they had no understanding of your culture, Bollywood, how big and huge and wonderful these films were that were being made? Were you patronised, I guess is the question?
I was patronised. I still get patronised.
Do you?
Yeah, still, but it's okay.
What's the most patronising thing people
Sorry?
do? What's the most patronising thing that's been done?
The worst thing that ever happened to me. I never made
If
that
you don't mind.
No. It wasn't patronising to me, but I was offered, Long Walk to Freedom, Mandela's film. And I was wondering whether I actually knew enough about him. And the producer was saying, "Shekhar, you should do it." And I remember sitting in the studio with one of the big studios head, and I said, maybe I'm doing Mandela, and I don't know. He said, no, don't do it. Nobody's interested in a film about a black man. That's how Hollywood used to be.
Do you think it's
changed? I got out of
changed?
the office, I phoned the producer in South Africa, and I said, I'm doing the film. No, but I think the other form of patronizing is it's also misunderstanding of another culture. It's a large part of patronizing is fear. You patronize somebody else because you don't know how else to respond, so you're responding with a certain amount of fear. And then the other person looks upon it as patronizing. Look, I came here as a chartered accountant. I was 17. And I still remember, I joined my company as an article clerk. And I laughed, but everybody would call me Abdul. I still don't know why. I call them now and said, "Do you remember you used to call me Abdul?" He said, "Yeah." And you used to laugh.
Abdul Kumar or not?
Sorry?
Abdul Kumar or not?
Abdul Kumar, right? Yeah. So no, you get patronized in many ways. You just got to ignore it because you just say patronizing is ignorance. That's all it is. It's complete ignorance.
I've got so many more questions, but I'm hoping that you might have some questions. Oh, there's a question over there. Well, let's start with you, sir. Go ahead there, sir.
Yeah, this is kind of for both of you, I think. It's been burning a hole in my head since you've been talking about the creative process. And I'm just wondering to what extent, once you've got the idea, that idea kind of takes control of the creative process rather than you being in control of the creative process. And I don't know where that tilting point lies, and I'm curious about it.
For me, I wonder all the time, where does the creative idea come from? Where does it come? Where is the source of creativity? And I've often asked myself that there's a bit of skull tissue I have, bone tissue. I thought, if it's not there, then my neurons will be floating around, right? And I would not believe that I was separate from all of the universe. I sincerely believe that the creative act is a moment like that, and it's an access point. And whether it's Einstein or Mozart, everybody has that. It's just a moment of it's a moment of faith, it's a moment of extreme humility, it's a moment of prayer, it's a moment of desperation, it's a moment of a lot of chaotic ideas, and suddenly something happens. And you get something like that. Now, if you are Mozart and you played music all your life, you interpret it as music. If you're a filmmaker or a storyteller, you interpret it as a story. If you're a physicist, you interpret it in physics. But it's a momentary creative act. Now, your question is, how do you take it forward? He's much more organized than I am. I can see that already. I take it forward by constantly becoming humble again. Okay, so what I do is I write anything that moves me desperately. I'll keep writing and keep writing, keep writing. And then I'll go to a writer and say, I've got these 40 scenes. Can you make something out of them? Can you make a necklace out of these little, what I think are pearls? So that's the chaotic way I work. I do not have the ability to do what he does, is sit down and work, in a linear fashion. This happens. I go boop, 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 all over.
Yeah, so for me, the joy of fiction is that, characters that I created in my head start living in your head and somebody else's head. But that's where the problem also lies, that you start by writing characters, and then as you work on those characters, they become people.
Yeah.
And then they start talking to you. And that's when they take control.
Yeah.
That's why, when writers talk about the writer's block is not the writer not having ideas. The writer's block to me is your characters who have become people telling you, I cannot do this, what you're asking me to do. And that's when I think you have to look at what you have created in a fresh light and say, maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere, and maybe this is not how it's not gonna work. Yeah. So
Thank
for me,
you.
that's
And in your other books, after your first book where you sat down and is that the same process every time? You can get it all out?
No, the first book I think is the easiest book. That's the only book that can be done in 2.5 months, because you write unself-consciously. You have no yardstick against which you are judging yourself. You have no expectation of success or failure or whatever. And that's why I think you can get it all out and get it over and done with. Once your first book becomes a huge success, then I think the pressure on the second book is much more. In fact, and that's what's called the dreaded second book syndrome, that many authors just feel the weight of the success of the first book to such an extent that they are not able to create a second book.
So first of all, namaste. Welcome to York. My name is Yash. I'm a student from India. And, having done media studies back in India as an undergrad student, we had film appreciation as a part of a study, and two of the films that we were told to watch were Masoom and Mr. India. And yes, they were a part of our study. And you mentioned about just, getting into filmmaking, not, really having any sort of this technical backing, and yet you created some fantastic films. So what is the process for you, according to you, to make, films that stay with the audience, especially for me, like, Mr. India, like you look at someone like Anil Kapoor, you look at Sri Devi, Hawa Hawaii, or, the late, great Amrish Puri ji, the dialogue, Mogambo Khush Hua. What is it that you tell your actors? What is it that you tell your crew that, makes that film a success?
It's different for every film. I mean, Amrish Puri and, Bandit Queen is so different from Mr. India. Elizabeth is so different from any other film that I've done. For me, every actor in every film is me.
Okay.
The subtext has to come from, otherwise how will I explain to an actor what it is? And when I made Bandit Queen, I was the raped and I was the rapist also. And I will pick things up from my own life and find, I'm going to tell you a little story, but all of you will hate me after this. Is that okay?
Never.
Yeah, no, I will tell you very honestly. How many of you have actually seen Bandit Queen? Okay, all right, Bandit Queen started the story of this girl who was 12 and she got married to a man who was 30 who was a pedophile. Now, I was supposed to shoot that scene in which he first actually attacks her and has sex with her with a 12-year-old. How do I do it? Now, as you say, you're a filmmaker. They'll say, do a close shot, do a wide shot, do this, exactly. Show fear in her eyes, show lust in his eyes, and I don't make that kind of film. So I said to myself, this 12-year-old girl, she was a street singer. We found her in her family, and then she had started to call me Shekhar, Mama Ji, Uncle. And
Yeah.
I said, I'm thinking, everybody's waiting for the first shot. I have no idea what the first shot is. So here's what I did. I sat there and I said, can I be sexually attracted to her? Literally. I just sat there and said, Shekhar, you have to understand the mind of a pedophile to do the scene. And I just kept staring at her. And I kept thinking, can I now? And as I was thinking that, and I was really thinking of the first shot, and I was thinking, and I said, can I, do you have it in you to be a pedophile? So look at what we do to ourselves. You go to be a filmmaker, you have to think like that. And then suddenly, the noisy set went quiet. And what happened? Why is it very quiet? And they were all staring at me. And I realized what I was doing was, I was walking towards her and she was backing off. That was it. But there was something in that that caught everybody, and that became the first shot. Him walking towards her. So, you know, on a lighter side, on a very serious film, Elizabeth, right? Initially, when I had fallen in love with a very big star in India, and I know how corrupting it can be if you have access as a lover to the biggest star in there, so everybody. So I knew all that all came in. But on a lighter side, there was a line in the end when Dudley, her lover, betrays her, says, go marry the Spanish king. It's okay, we'll still be lovers. You don't have to sleep with him except once or twice, you know. In the end, he betrays her, and he's in kind of being in kind of prison. And then he says to her, why don't you just kill me? Let me, you know, don't torture me, just kill me. And her response to that is, no, I want to see you alive in court every day so I can be reminded of the dangers of love. Now, where do you think that line came from? If I tell you, you'd never guess. You'd never guess. It came from a man called Muhammad Ali when he was Cassius Clay. I read somewhere in his autobiography that when he had to fight Sonny Liston, he said that I kept a photograph of Sonny Liston in front of me, and every morning when I would wake up, I'd see him. Every time I walked into my room, I would see him. I remember that. And the line comes from there. So somewhere you are the character, somewhere you are the experience, somewhere you experience some things, but otherwise, how do you do it as a director? You know? So if you ever do it, you should have the ability to be everything. Because every human emotion, if it exists inside you.
Makes me understand why you spend a long time between films. Yeah, because it takes everything from you.
It's exhausting.
Absolutely.
It's exhausting.
I know there were other hands up. Would you like to just pass the microphone there and then another one here afterwards? Go for it.
We're in a university. Do you think you can teach creativity?
Good question.
I've tried it, and I've landed up only asking everybody to sit with me and let's find a way to discover ourselves. Because that's what I land up doing. And what is yourself? Who are you? Who are you is a fundamental idea behind creativity. Who are you? And you can change, you know, who are you at that moment when you're shooting this or you're writing this, who are you at that moment? But unless you know who you are or you start, it's all creativity is an exploration of the self.
I mean, I think you cannot teach imagination, but you can teach creativity in the sense that what is the craft of converting that imagination into a product. And the problem is that craft has become so structured and uniform that there are editors who say, I know this from the first sentence that this is the product of a creative writing workshop.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's also something around you need to provide people with opportunities to be creative. So you may not be able to teach creativity potentially, but you...
Yeah, so let me tell you what was the inspiration for Q&A, apart from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. in India, there was a project called Hole in the Wall. Now, this was a very interesting project in which a group of computer scientists, they were living in a place called Kalkaji, and right next to their sprawling complex was a sprawling slum. And what they did was they literally carved a hole in the wall, which was adjoining the slum, and they placed a freely accessible computer with a touch screen and a mouse facing the slum. And then they said, let's see what happens. And believe it or not, within 3 months, children living in that slum, children who had never gone to school, who cannot read a word of English, they started using that computer entirely on their own. This is called unassisted learning. And that sort of also sparked something in my head. I said, a slum kid can start using a computer, then a slum kid can also participate in a brain quiz and win. So that's the matter of opportunity that you brought about. That, we think that these poor guys, these poor little boys and girls can't use computers because we have not given them computers. But give it to them, and they can be as productive and as creative as anybody else.
I remember doing a story about that when I was with Jon Snow in India for Channel 4 News many years ago. It's just reminded me.
You've both broken through globally, and thinking about the Indian film market, it's the biggest in the world. Why do you think so few films actually cross over globally?
Because certainly, I used to say it's because of a completely different culture till all the Korean films started to do so well. That's also a completely different. I think we suffer from a certain amount of inertia that we have a big market at home. So Koreans cannot make a big film without access to the international market. We can. We have 1.4 billion people, and we are avid film goers. And so because we've always had a big home market, and therefore the need to get out and show your films outside, that has been that great. And for all of Netflix and everybody, all the Indian film directors say, oh, now it's Netflix and Amazon will come and we'll get an international market. And they all soon realized they didn't come here to give you an international market. They came to make inroads into your market. So that's it. That's it. We have a big, that's the issue. That's why we have it.
There's an appetite.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, there's appetite, he said.
Sorry?
There's appetite for it, he said.
Oh, no, there is.
Yeah.
There is appetite for it. I mean, there's that film, what is it called? RRR. Did $200 million or something. It's more Bollywood than any Bollywood film I've ever seen. Yeah.
I think Slumdog Millionaire was one of the first big crossover films. And the reason why it succeeded, I think, is because a Bollywood film done in the Hollywood style. I think that is the thing, because, there is a certain sensibility that Hollywood films have, and there is a certain sensibility that Bollywood films have, and the twain don't often meet. But when you create something, which has a very international look and feel, and yet which is rooted in the Indian reality, then I think, there was another very good film called Salaam Bombay. But that came out in 1988. It was not the era of India. It didn't do too well. Monsoon Wedding is another film which I think, has appealed to audiences in the West as well.
We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to very quickly run through questions, if you wouldn't mind.
Good evening. Hi, I just want to say, I read Q&A and it was a delight to read, and, even more of a delight than the film that it inspired. And Shekhar, I've been a fan of yours since watching Masoom.
Since you were a kid and I was an adult.
Yeah, I think I was about 14, 13 when I watched Masoom, and it was, it was groundbreaking. I loved it. I even liked your acting in Tute Khilone and
high praise. High praise.
And in Falak, I thought you were a good actor in this. It's a shame that you didn't kind of do more acting. But my question is really about the potential negative aspects of creativity. And you may consider this a little bit of a loaded question, but over the past few years, fingers have been pointing at the Bollywood film industry from certain media and political circles, and the fingers have been pointing quite aggressively, in fact, in that since independence, the Indian film industry, through insidious subliminal messaging within storylines, has been undermining and perhaps ridiculing the indigenous customs and traditions of the country. Do you think that there is any truth in this?
There are a lot of hidden questions in what you just said.
That's why I said it was a loaded question.
Yeah. So the first thing is, it's a duty of all artists to go out and dig out from society what's wrong with society. Because if artists don't do that, who will? Now let's look at the United States. The greatest filmmakers, Scorsese, everybody is hit out at the failings of the society. All of these directors have become great directors because they've looked at society and talked about it. Danny Boyle is a great director here because he looks at the society here. So what else was Trainspotting? You know? So, no, it's our job. And artists are failing at their job if they're not completely rebellious. And who else? Who else is going to do it?
I'm going to very quickly, because we'd love to fit your question in, and potentially yours as well if we can get to the end of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Shekhar, Vikas, namaste, welcome to York. Welcome to York Indian Cultural Association as well. Thank you for taking us through a journey of religion, science, destiny, diplomacy, kismet, ultimately. Just a couple of quick-fire questions.
Well, yeah, very quick. Quick fire, if quick, because we've got to get this gentleman in.
Old Bollywood or new Bollywood? Old Bollywood or new Bollywood?
Old Bollywood.
Okay. Shah Rukh Khan or Salman Khan?
Neither.
Thank you very much.
Okay, right. And you, just for the last question to you, sir.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for being here. I think what we've seen in this room is two very diametrically opposite creative ethoses and creative philosophies, if you will. So I was curious to ask you about the act or practice, if you will, of consistency in the creative arts, in being creative. Do you think being creative exists in being consistent with it, or can creativity exist in like a sort of amorphous, uneven mind space as well?
Why are you imposing the burden of consistency on an artist? Does that mean you got to keep on doing something, or be consistent to keep doing what you're doing? I've never made a film. If you look at, I've made 7 films and things. Nothing is similar. Otherwise, I'm climbing the same mountain constantly, and I'm patting myself on the back because I know exactly where to put my foot and where the rope should go. So where's the greater challenge? Where's the unknown? Because the 3 greatest words that I would say, if you're asking me what is creativity, I would say the 3 best words are I don't know. And as long as you can go on saying I don't know. So don't burden me with, don't burden yourself with consistency. Be as inconsistent as possible. Right?
Vikas?
Yeah, I think what he was implying, probably I would answer it from the point of view of a storyteller or a novelist, is you have to be consistent in the sense of you have to understand that you have to finish this thing, which means you have to work at it every day. And that's why some novelists set themselves targets, you know, that I will do at least 1,000 words a day. Because if you don't do that, then it's very easy to lose the thread of the plot, you know, just, you know, have your cup of coffee, go for a walk, catch a movie, and then forget that you are a writer and this is your job and you have to finish this. I've met so many budding authors who say, I started something and, you know, I did it for 6 months and then I just couldn't finish it. And they couldn't finish it because they were not consistent.
You know, I write stories every day. But I don't write them in novels, I write them on Instagram. I give myself this thing, I give myself 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah.
I take a picture and say, no, Shekhar, you have to tell a story about this picture. And you have to finish it in 7 or 8 minutes. And you cannot change once you've written it, and you cannot not post it.
Yeah.
That's consistency. That's discipline.
That is
right? But
anybody who doesn't follow him on Instagram, we all need to get following him immediately, because this sounds like a brilliant new thing for me to look at every day.
Yeah. I would train myself to keep going.
Wonderful.
Every day a new story.
Fabulous. I mean, I think we would like to keep going all evening, but we can't, because first of all, you're probably really hungry. Secondly, we've passed our time. But thank you so much, Shekhar Kapur and Vikas Swarup. Absolutely sharing your thoughts and experience has been wonderful. I hope I've added a tiny bit of creativity to the chaoticness of my questioning. Thank you all so much for coming to today's event. I'm told you should check out the festival programme for the rest of the programme, but I mean, I don't know how much more festival there is, only a day or two, but come on, keep going. We're in this incredibly creative, inspiring place, and yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.